And okay, Jim is now recording. Okay, so really pleased today to have all of you here. Get some notes out since I realized the mistake I made ahead of you. Anyway, okay, so what I'm going to do first today is we're going to get started with just a quick overview of Air Force Material Command, and apologies for any of you that have seen this before, but you'll do a lot better on the quiz. Okay, so, but you know, it's worth hearing again just because the command is so wide-ranging and you know, geographically located, you know, across the United States and supports the Air Force worldwide. So I'm going to go through that first, and then we're going to transition into the source selection process, which is something I think as a small business community, you should definitely understand that process. I can speak as someone that has been doing acquisition for many years, or in the acquisition career for many years, that process is quite objective, regimented, and we follow that process consistently. And so having the insight of how we do that will give you the insight necessary to understand sometimes of maybe why it may take so long if you're asking that question, or just to understand what we go through in the sense of what we think about and consider when we're in that process. So, but I'm not going to say anything more about that. I'll leave that to the speaker. So what we're going to do is I'm going to transition over to just doing a quick intro of the command. So Jim, next chart. Okay, so our mission and our vision. And I always start out by saying, you know, remember Air Force Material Command, what's important about our title, right? It's the way we spell material. It's spelled with an E. What is material? Well, material is military material. What is military material for the Air Force? Well, it's aircraft, propulsion systems, weapon systems, munitions, and it takes it from the initial idea all the way through its development, test, acquisition, sustainment throughout its life. And so that is what the command is. And then it also supports those systems throughout their life cycle. Can you get that second door closed, please? Okay. So what is our mission? Is powering the world's greatest Air Force. We develop, deliver, support, and sustain war-winning capabilities. I just talked about that, and we'll see that further defined within our organizational construct. And then our vision is one AFMC, collaborative, innovative, trusted, empowered, indispensable to our nation, disruptive to our adversaries. And you may ask yourself, why does it say collaborative, right? You would think that's a given. Well, it is a given, but we have to keep it in the forefront because we are so large and we cover such a span of execution across an Air Force mission of what we are doing. And that is really supplying the Air Force the mission capability that needs to execute every day. The next chart. Okay, so we have just over 86,000 employees. Okay, predominantly civilian. So you think of a traditional military command as military. We are predominantly civilian, and it's essentially because of what we do. And I'll go into that just a little bit further. The next chart. I always think it's interesting to see that over 40% of all the Air Force civilians work within this command. What's the next chart? Okay, this is our leadership. General Duke Richardson is our commander. He's a 4-star general. Our deputy commander is Lieutenant General Linda Hurry. Our executive director is Miss Lorna Estep. Okay, and so because of our predominance of civilians in the command, we have a senior civilian executive in our leadership. And Ms. Estep is the highest ranking civilian in the command. She's equivalent to a 3-star general. And she is, manages that workforce. She's also my boss. But anyway, so then we have our command sheet. So next chart. Okay, so this one, and if you've talked to me in the past, you've heard me say it, and that is we execute a budget of about 80 billion every year. I always tell small businesses, but we're broke, right? And we're turning over all the sofa cushions. Because trust me, it's like we use every penny, right, to execute the mission. And so 45% of the Air Force budget is executed by Air Force Material Command. That percentage is much higher if it's just acquisition dollars. Okay, next chart. Okay, so this is our command strategic plan. And I'm just going to cover the highlights for you, but it gives you an idea, right, of what we're focusing on. And so number one there is deliver integrated capabilities and integrate research, development, test, sustainment, support, and infrastructure to maximize readiness and lethality for each capability across all capabilities, right? So that's that integration of these capabilities of research all the way through, as I mentioned, test, sustain, acquisition, sustainment, and its installation, infrastructure support globally must be integrated to be effective, and that's what we do. Okay, we strengthen our team, advance the professional and personal development, retention, resilience, innovation of our workforce, in order for all of our folks to achieve their full potential, revolutionize our processes, implement enterprise solutions, digital material management, and other methods to revolutionize our processes and support the mission execution of the warfighter. I can tell all of you that, you think of the government as bureaucratic, and maybe of military organizations being very structured and hierarchical. True, but I will tell you that there is consistently a focus on how we can do things more efficiently and reduce bureaucracy, right? And we do that with, I got to say, I'm super proud. I've been doing this for a long time, and of what we achieve, even with what we follow, and the bureaucracy that is in place by law, and a lot of that is to protect you, the taxpayer. So, and we do that quite effectively and deliver the world's greatest Air Force. So I'm just super proud of what we achieved. And then we amplifying warfighter culture and connect every agency, airmen, and guardians to the mission, and focus the material enterprise on delivering capabilities and services in support of operational execution. So that's connecting us to the mission every day. The next chart. Yes.
Sorry. Given that the U.S. Air Force materials mission is about supplying capabilities, the right place for a small business specializing in chip development, technology, or should we be searching elsewhere?
Well, that is a good question, and you probably need to, just connect them to my calendar, get on the calendar. Okay, but that one, yes, it could be bought within the command, maybe at locations. I can tell you that we don't buy that at a large-scale enterprise level. But what I would suggest there is that we make available our expiring contracts list. Okay, and if we'll type in the chat or workflow, and all you got to do is, and we're doing that right now, and just email that, ask for our expiring contract list. So I'll show you all the expiring contracts in the command and where they're located the next 2 years, so you can look on there and see what, if there's anything in there in executive development, leadership, etc., that you could then market yourself to that location, because I'm telling you, typically within the federal government, that once an office buys something, guess what? They buy it again. Okay. So basically that, and all you on today and in the room, if you're interested in the expiring contract list, all you got to do is ask for it. We'll send it to you. Chelsea monitors the workflow and we'll send that to you. It's a large file. And so we do it the old fashioned way with Excel. And but it works. And so and there's other resources out there. There's also another command out there. It's called Air Education and Training Command. Maybe worth you do some Googling on and some research, and then contact our office again, and we can give you the small business director for Air Education and Training Command. That's just my brainstorming based on the question. Okay, so the next chart. Okay, so remember when I ran through everything we do? We do that. Okay, so I'm at headquarters, and Ryan here is in my office with me. Okay, so we're at headquarters. We do what's called an operation train equip role. I don't buy anything, fortunately, anymore, right? And so we support all those the centers who are actually executing that acquisition mission or the other missions I described associated with that, okay? So, Air Force, and blue here, we all do what we say we do, okay? You just have to know what word to catch, you know what I mean? Remember I told you Air Force Material Command, pay attention to material. Okay, so Air Force Research Laboratory, that's the, you know, where we're taking that basic idea, the dawning of an idea, all the way through. It's to essentially prototype up to that point. And also they execute the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force. And when I say Department of the Air Force, that's Air Force and Space Force, okay? They support both the Air and Space Forces, and the Department of the Air Force SIBR program is executed within AFRL by an organization called AFWorks, and you may have heard of them. Okay. They're easy to connect with, www.afworks.com. So then next, Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, and what they do essentially is acquire all those systems that you're familiar with, right? B-21, KC-46, all the fighter aircraft, drones, and they do that within what's called PEO portfolios, Program Executive Officer portfolios. And to make it simple, they're kind of like a CEO of a portfolio, and we have a PEO for bombers, right? And so they manage all of our bomber fleet, B-52, B-21, D-2, B1, did I say B1? But B1, all the bombers, right? And so what they do, and you think maybe asking yourself, okay, so we're not, you know, only B-21 is the new one. I know those other ones have been around, but we're always in the process of modernizing or updating or keeping those at operational of what the need is and modifications that need to be done of those platforms. So they do that both on the acquisition and the sustainment, because as you know, many times we need the OEMs to support us through in the sustainment process through its life. And so that's Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. Note, we're going through what we're calling a reoptimization of our organizational structure. And so Air Force Lifecycle Management Center will become two different centers. One's called Air Force Air Dominance Center, and the other one is going to be called Air Force Information Dominance Center, okay? And actually, it's going to make it easier because they are really super clear at that point of what they do, okay? So just keep that in mind. Then, okay, so what happens? We bought it, and then but before it enters the inventory, we test it. We have a very, you know, as you can imagine, we test things rigorously. And so we do that at Air Force Test Center, and it's they're headquartered out in the desert of Southern California at Edwards Air Force Base. So a very large range there, a large over water range in the Gulf of Mexico at Eglin Air Force Base, the Panhandle, Florida, and the world standard wind tunnel facility in Arnold Air Force Base in Tennessee. So that's the test center. And then, okay, so it's been tested. It's now it's been delivered. We now have it the inventory. We sustain it through its lifetime, life cycle, remainder of its life. Air Force Sustainment Center, headquartered at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. That is our depots. Okay, so we have, just like commercial aircraft depots. And so we have a depot at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City, a depot at Hill Air Force Base in Ogden, Utah, and a depot at Robbins Air Force Base south of Atlanta. And they, so when you hear the B-52 has flown 50 years, and they're going to fly 50 more, it's because of our depots. Okay. They keep these aging platforms operational and effective for many, many years. Okay, so, and they also manage our supply chain. So and you can only imagine the bowl of spaghetti our supply chain is, but they do that as well. Okay, so then Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, and again, they manage, execute our nuclear enterprise, right? If you're following the news, you know that we are recapitalizing our nuclear arsenal, and that's what the Nuclear Weapons Center does. We are also, their name is also going to change to Air Force Nuclear Systems Center. Okay, and again, just recognizing that there's more, it's a broader scope than just the weapons aspect. Okay? And then our last one is Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center, headquartered at Joint Base San Antonio in San Antonio. Okay, so basically, what do they do? Installation and mission support. And that is, they are, to make it easy, they are managing our installations worldwide as an enterprise. We say as a weapon system. And they look at that, and I'll make it simple, infrastructure, HVAC, paving, roofing, across the entire enterprise, okay, across the globe, all these Air Force installations. And they also are responsible for new infrastructure required, let's say, for a weapon system that needs a particular type of environment, let's say a hangar for, and they will build that. Okay, so that's Air Force Installation Mission Support Center. So that's the 6 centers that took you across the entire range where I started with, what the command is. So you can imagine the scope of that, and 80,000 employees all doing that across the nation for a global impact. Next chart. The rest are primarily for reference, and you'll get these, okay? This just gives you a little bit more detail on the centers, where they're located, where they're what we call OLs, operating locations. Okay. We speak in acronyms, so always remember to, I always try to remember to find my acronyms. Next chart. This is our locations. Next chart. Okay. These are our small business directors at all those centers that I just talked about, okay? And you can contact me at my office at the workflow there. And we monitor that, but I can tell you we get a lot. So basically, if you don't hear back, I want you to ping us. Don't hesitate to email us and say, hey Jeff, I haven't heard back from you, or whoever. Chelsea monitors that, so just say, hey Chelsea, what's going on here, okay? And we will get on it. Trust me. Next chart. That's all right. Okay, so this is the bragging, and I won't make it long, but we set a record last year, $9.7 billion small business spend. We set a record in our small disadvantaged business spend and our hub zone spend. I don't want to give the exact number because I'm afraid I'll jinx it, but we're going to set another record in FY24, and it's going to be kaboom. It's going to be big, okay? So we're going to be super excited. Next chart. Okay, these are, just for your reference, these are goals. As many of you know, the Department of the Air Force SBA and the DoD negotiate goals, then they flow down to the services. This is the Air Force's goal and the AFMC's goals. And you may look at that and go, oh, gee, AFMC has lower goals than the Air Force, right? And they may be lower than what you're seeing at the federal government level. And that's just because of what we buy. As you can only imagine, the B-21 is expensive, right? And so, but it can't be produced by a small business. So our percentages are low, but our dollars are very high. So as I mentioned, we had over $9.7 billion in small business spend last year, but that was I think around 16 or a little over 15%. We exceeded our goal. It represented about 15%. Next chart. Okay, so just running through here, these were our colliders this year, and I'm just showing you because I want you, all of you, if you haven't been, you need to get connected to Jim Masonbrink at WBI. There's his email address. You can email him directly as often as you like. And then there's AFLCMC Hub, which has just been totally revamped and more user friendly. And Jim also puts the colliders out there, and that you can access recordings and register for. And he has colliders throughout the year. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just had a gentleman here ask me, where is part one at? And part one is on the website.
Yeah.
Which was the POM process.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, yeah, you can go out there and look at it.
Right. All right. So we're running a series of colliders called Demystifying the Acquisition Process. Episode 1 was the POM process. Okay, and that's our budgeting process. I'll make it easy. And that's quite a process. And so we have the experts run through that. And so we're doing that again today on the source selection process. But anyway, so Jim has colliders that he produces for WBI, but next, probably starting next spring, we'll be with our Air Force Material Command colliders starting our next season of colliders for the summer. So next chart. We may have some pop-ups too in between. Okay, so where do you find opportunities? This is very high level. Easy, I just mentioned the expiring contract list, right? The other one is there's a Air Force level expiring contract list on the Air Force site. The link is there. It doesn't give you the amount of data we give you. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that. So, but if you find something that's not an AFMC and you want to know more information about it, just let me know, and we can find out for you. Then the AFTEC, Air Force Civil Engineering Center, which is part of Air Force Installation Mission Support Center, they publish all their task order lists for the year, for the next 2 years. And then I kind of give you some instructions on where to find that. So that's it for me. Yeah. Okay, so with that, what I'm going to do is introduce our speakers. I'm going to read their bios. This is the prerequisite. Usually this is what happens. And then you get embarrassed when they're going to read about me. And I always hate it. But anyway, okay, so first off, we're going to have Jackie Edwards, and she is the Chief of Contracts for the Acquisition Center of Excellence, what we internally call the ACE, okay. Acquisition Center of Excellence. She has over 20 years of government acquisition experience, all at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She has worked specialized contracting, Air Force Research Laboratory, F-16, F-15EX, business enterprise systems, sensors, medium altitude UAS, simulators. I used to work in simulators, and multiple foreign military sales assignments as well. Jackie has been at the ACE for about a year. And, but, you know, when reading her bio there, you know, that covered a lot of that span of what we just talked about. Yeah, that's all within the plan. Okay, next we'll be hearing from, I think, Jason, are you second? You're third. Okay, so we're going to go in order. So Deneen Oldham. Did I say that correctly? Okay, Ms. Deneen Oldham is a procurement analyst serving as a source selection advisor at the Acquisition Center of Excellence at Air Force Material Command, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. As source selection advisor, Ms. Oldham conducts source selection and post-award training for both junior and senior acquisition professionals in the mobility and training aircraft for presidential and executive airlift and agile combat support directorates. Those are referencing those PEO portfolios I mentioned to you earlier. So there's a PEO for executive airlift for the presidential aircraft fleet and high-level government officials. Ms. Oldham served as a contract administrator for the Defense Management Agency previously, also as an unlimited warranted contracting officer to include FMS, what we call foreign military sales, and Air Force lifecycle management. Dean was also professional contract management at Defense Acquisition University in Kettering, Ohio. So that's also here, the Defense Acquisition University, teaching the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, source selection, and cost and pricing. So that, and then Jason. Jason, did I say that right? Chaddock, sorry, Jason Chaddock. Jason Chaddock is a procurement analyst at the Acquisition Center of Excellence, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. He serves as a contracting subject matter expert and provides expert advice and hands-on assistance to the acquisition workforce and leadership to instill credibility, excellence, and innovation in the Air Force acquisition sustainment process. He also serves as a champion of innovation with the goal of accelerating the acquisition process. Jason entered the Air Force as a civilian in June 2002 as a Copper Cap trainee. He has multiple contracting positions, including contract specialist, unlimited CO, contracting officer, section chief, and branch chief, in support of a wide variety of programs to include F-22, Special Operation Forces, what we call SOF, Predator Reaper, those are the UAVs that we just mentioned, that you're probably familiar with, commercial derivatives, and NASIC. And NASIC is National Air and Space Intelligence Center. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jay. Thank you.
Stand over here.
That's smart.
Yeah. Okay, here's the charts. Good afternoon. Thank you all for having us. Next chart. So who has heard of the ACE acquisition center? Here in the room. Maybe your government acquisition team that you're working with has mentioned getting advice from the ACE, or you've turned in a proposal locally at Wright-Pat at our building in Area B in Building 570. Pre-COVID, that was the thing to do, so turn in your proposal to our building at the ACE. The source selection teams usually hang out there away from their execution offices and PEOs and work a source selection. So that was quite common. Or maybe you've met an ACE team member at an industry day or some other industry event, but ACE team members are out there. We're sprinkled around the government teams. And we are specific to Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. And those are the programs that we support. What's our purpose? We are problem solvers. We are efficiency experts for all things Air Force purchasing. The ACE consists of all functional areas. So contracting, program management, engineering, financial managers, logistics. We even have pricing, SMEs at the ACE. All those individuals have many years of acquisition experience, and we form internal IPTs ourselves at the ACE to then support various directorates and PEOs across LCMC and help them through their competitive source selections. That's mainly our bread and butter. but we also help in the sole source acquisition world as well. Mainly with sole source tech eval training. That's a good one that we offer, but we help throughout the entire life cycle of an acquisition. So our customer is the execution teams. So I'll say terms such as the execution teams, the buying offices, we support the PEOs. So that's our customer. We provide an advisory service to them. Okay, next chart, please.
Sorry.
Okay. The next chart, I just wanted to share the ACE mission and vision. I hit on this already, but again, our customer are those execution teams who support the PEOs and the AFMC centers. We provide on-demand support. We provide independent, like a neutral third-party advisory support. We help the teams with their critical thinking. We help instill credibility and excellence and innovation. You heard that in Jason's bio, but that's what we do. We help the teams throughout the entire acquisition lifecycle. Next chart, please. So some of our services. So what happens is the execution teams reach out to the ACE. They contact us and they say, hey, we plan on doing a competitive source selection. We need help. Either team members have never done this before, or it's been a really long time, or we have new team members that, we all need to gel together so that we can work this acquisition more cohesively, more efficiently. So they reach out to the ACE for training. So we then at the ACE provide a dedicated expert team made up of all those functional areas to help that execution team or the buying team throughout their competitive source selection, throughout every step of the way. And that is our dedicated advisor team that we can then help the teams. Sometimes teams get started on their own and they get through the flow and they realize, oh, we need some help here, or can you review these documents for us, or can you help us with our ENs, our evaluation notices, or can you help us with these offer proposals, or whatever the case may be. Then we can provide on-demand support and we provide just-in-time training for those teams. So we are available really at any time, any place, anytime, anywhere to help our teams. We are there for them. The comments and the information and the advice that the execution teams get from the ACE, it is advisory only. So unlike comments from their legal counsel or from their policy shop, the execution team and the PCO specifically has to address and adjudicate each and every legal comment on the contract file or the acquisition plan or the market research report or whatever document stage that they're reviewing. The team has to, the PCO has to write and sign a memo to the file that stays in the official contract file, adjudicating every legal comment and every policy comment. When teams get comments from the ACE, it is just our advice. They don't have to take our advice. And they don't have to adjudicate every comment and remark that we give to the team. So the teams are more apt to come to us. Okay, a lot of times it's for a sanity check along the way, along their acquisition flow there. So we tell the teams, help us help you. Come to us early, come to us often, and we help you through the process. We give you some advice. Denise is going to cover this later in her briefing, but we do provide FAR Part 15 competitive source selection training to the government teams, and we also provide FAR Part 16 fair opportunity training, and we will explain specifically what the differences are and what that means. And we also help support the ombudsman. So you may have seen an ombudsman name, a person named and their contact information and a competitive source selection posting. Those people are there to help companies adjudicate any disputes that they may have or help them with concerns. They are an impartial, confidential median for companies to use. Maybe the company is considering issuing a protest, then maybe you want to talk to the ombudsman first to help clarify something before you do that, or to help eliminate a potential protest. The ombudsman wears many hats. Okay, an ombudsman role is usually not their sole role. Usually, this colonel or lieutenant colonel wears multiple hats and is a senior acquisition leader, can be. And they have an acquisition background, but maybe they have a PM background or engineering background, and they're not, a previous contracting officer, let's say. So sometimes the ombudsman comes to the ACE and asks for a sanity check. Say, hey, am I looking at this right? Can you help me look at what the company's complaint is or what their concerns are? And we are a neutral third party to just help advise the ombudsman. They don't always come to us, but sometimes they do. And that's just one of our services. We help support the ombudsman. And Jason's really good at that too. All right, next chart. So the ACE within Air Force LCMC has 5 operating locations, OLs. We are at Wright Pat, Hill, Hanscom, Tinker, and Robbins. There used to be an ACE location at Eglin Air Force Base in the Panhandle there in Florida, but they stood down and Wright Pat took over their workload recently, maybe the last 18 months or so. And just to give you a frame of reference, aside from Wright Pat, those other 4 locations have maybe 3 to 5 ACE advisors located at those locations, whereas Wright Pat ACE has about 30 SMEs at our Wright Pat ACE office. So we do a lot of work at Wright Pat and support a lot of programs, and we're heavily used. Okay, next chart. I think this is my last chart just on the ACE, and then I have a few more charts after that. But this chart, the information on the right is just to show that basically we support all types of different programs. Whether the government buying team is working an urgent operational need, or they're working on a rapid prototyping effort or rapid fielding, or they're buying a major weapon system or subsystem or software or defense business system, services, supply, you name it. This covers it and the ACE supports it and we can advise on it. So we help all teams across LCMC with those things. Acquisition strategy support, we have a handful of workshops that we provide for acquisition strategy, pre-award risk. We have a great schedule workshop and market research training. This is where the small business community comes in, where maybe your ears are ringing. We talk about small business a lot in the acquisition strategy time phase of the acquisition process. Jason is going to talk to you later more specifically about the market research portion of that and how we advise government teams on market research and the small business community's role in responding to RFIs, sources sought, letting us know you're out there. It's very important. So Jason's going to expand on that. And how we train and how we advise our government teams and how they look for you all. So both the small business community and the government teams play a role in finding each other, okay? So RFP development support, we help teams develop their Section A and Section L and M. We have a workshop for that. And pricing support, I mentioned before, we have a pricing SME at the ACE. Proposal evaluations, and also that sole source tech eval training I mentioned as well.
Jackie,
Yes.
is someone going to tell them what L&M is?
Oh, so sections L and M of the workshop. Yes, I believe Deneen goes into detail about that. She's going to talk about the basics of source selection, but that's like the instruction to offers and what the offers will be evaluated on. Thank you for the question. Okay, next chart. So, small businesses. Your community plays a vital role in the defense industrial base. Okay, you help drive our economy, advance innovation, and strengthen our national defense. This is not just lip service or something that sounds good to say. This is real, and the Department of Defense is very focused on this. It's a top priority. They communicate frequently, the DoD does, with the acquisition community to keep a focus and keep small business as a top priority for the department. So I just listed 3 of recent memos where the DoD talked about small business, 2 of which are from this year, January of 24 and April of 24, where the DoD wants to increase small business opportunities and participation. So with that, the acquisition community pays attention. It's not a memo we just push to the side and, oh yeah, that sounded nice. Okay, we follow it. We are required to follow it. There's regulations in the FAR Part 19 specifically, that requires us to follow it. And as advisors in the ACE, we talk about small business a lot. We ensure that the buying teams in the government are following the regs. And these memos specifically highlighted the benefits of multiple award contracts, or MACs. We call them MAC IDIQs. Maybe you're familiar, maybe you're already participating in one or some, but typically the overarching multiple award contract is awarded via FAR Part 15 competitive source selection process or procedures. And then the orders under that multiple award contract are then competed via FAR Part 16 fair opportunity. And Janine is going to talk more specifically about that. But if a small business can get a total set aside, a small business community can get a total set aside for a multiple award IDIQ, that's wonderful. Sometimes the MAC IDIQ cannot be totally set aside for small business, and it can have a large business pool and a small business pool. And still there's an opportunity for the small business community to compete. So the government likes MAC IDIQs. They help alleviate administrative burden when we're issuing orders on them. That's quicker and easier than always doing a FAR Part 15 source selection and reinventing the wheel every time we have a new government requirement. So, okay, next chart, please. So scaling small business participation. Acquisition planning, I mentioned previously, is multiple touch points in that stage of acquisition where small business is considered, where small business is a top priority, and where your community is a focus, okay? The government structures requirements to facilitate competition among and by small business. Our market research should assess whether our government needs can be met by a small business program, and that's a regulation that we have to follow in FAR Part 19. Contracting officers are required to write determination in the contract file if they're not setting it aside for small business. So there's a lot of things that we as contracting people, and Janine and Jason and I are all previous contracting officers. Sorry, you don't have any PMs or engineers here today from the ACE, but you have contracting. So, but there's a lot of rules that the contracting officer has to follow. And if it's not applicable, we don't have to say why it's not applicable. But for small businesses, we do. We have to write a determination. Why are we not setting this aside for small business? And that is in the official contract file, and it gets reviewed by legal and policy and the clearance authority and everybody else. So it's important that market research be done properly, that small businesses are considered early on and getting involved, and that your community is paying attention to requests for information and sources sought, and information that's getting pushed out and posted from the government buying teams. Also, the government teams follow the rule of two. So the contracting officer shall set aside any acquisition over the simplified acquisition threshold, which is 250,000, for small business participation when there's a reasonable expectation that we're going to get 2 or more offers from a responsible small business. That's the words we like to use, and that the award will be made at a fair market price. Okay. So no colluding. You can't say, oh, let's 2 of us get together and just lay it on the government. No, fair market price and at least 2 responsible small businesses. And let's see here. And if the total set aside is not appropriate, the contracting officer shall set aside a portion of the acquisition exclusive for small business if that's appropriate, when that's appropriate. So a lot of opportunity for small business to play in the government acquisition early on. Next chart, please. So the DoD memos also talk about increasing small business opportunities. The multiple award contract strategies I mentioned earlier, they're timely, they're efficient. The FAR Part 15 competitive source selection procedures that help establish that multiple award IDIQ, that can take a while. But there's a lot that is done during that phase to set up that MAC IDIQ. And once that's awarded, then the orders under that MAC IDIQ are awarded under fair opportunity. And that's where the time savings is. That's where the efficiency lies. The SBPs are your small business professionals, and the SBA PCR is the Small Business Administration Procurement Center representatives, and they are part of the acquisition team. Okay, buying offices in each PEO, each directorate under LCMC, they have a small business rep that they go to, and they have the small business rep review their acquisition plan. They look at their market research. They can go to their small business rep and ask, hey, what small businesses do you know? What programs do you know of that support this product support code or our NAICS code? So they are part of the team early on. Again, just another touch point of where we are thinking about and talking about the small business community. And then that ACT plan, that's in our official contract file, and the DD 2579, which is a small business coordination form. It's all part of the regulations we have to follow. Those are all reviewed by the small business professional in accordance with the regs. And it's, again, another opportunity where it's a sanity check that the government buying team is doing what they're supposed to be doing and involving small businesses in their buy. The ACT plan also should address on-ramps to allow small businesses to be added during the performance period. And existing small businesses who outgrow their small business status should not be off-ramped from MAC IDIQs. That's important to note. There is a couple exceptions. If you are a small business that is involved in a merger, or if you are a small business and you acquire another business and that makes you a large business, then that may off-ramp you. But if you're just a large business or small business doing a lot and you become a large business, you are not off-ramped during the period of performance of that MAC IDIQ. And Jason will cover this more in his market research briefing, but we ensure that the government buying teams are using tools that are out there to help determine the best vehicle possible to utilize to get small business participation. And some of those are listed here at the bottom of the chart: the federal supplier-based dashboard, the procurement equity tool, and the dynamic small business search tool. We use those. We advise the government teams to use them, and they're active and important. Okay, next chart, please. So coming up next, oh, I don't think that sent the whole thing, so I'll just talk to it. But then coming up next is Ms. Deneen. She's going to talk about the basics of source selection.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the next slide, but it's for some reason it's not showing complete there. So Denise is going to talk about the basics of source selection. Some of you may have been doing source selections for decades and years, and some of your companies, it may be very new to you. So Janine's going to cover the basics. She's going to talk about small business evaluation and source selection. She's going to hit on the FAR Part 15 versus 16 and the differences there and some methods of source selection that the government uses. And then Jason's going to talk about market research, RFIs versus sources sought, why they're important, why the small business community should pay attention to those. He's going to go over some myth busters and talk about other transactions. All right, over to you, Ms. Deneen.
Did have one question on the line. That's it. Does anyone have the names of the LG members of the AFLCMC province?
You can get those.
Okay, my name again is Deneen Odom, and so today, as Jackie mentioned, that I'm going to give you an overview of the source selection process, looking at some of the common practices and a few of the procedures. I don't want to bore you to death, but because it can get detailed, so I tried to make sure I made it a little bit more interesting. Tried very hard, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay. So my goal really is to kind of remove some of the mystery that's surrounding for selection process, because it is. I mean, it's sometimes even a mystery to me, and I've been doing it for 20 years. Okay. So next chart, please.
Well, you get a little build there.
I know. I did animation.
You got build. Let me
know. I know. I will. I'll put you with a couple of these. So source selection is really critical to the Department of Defense, and we use this to award contracts to the most qualified contractors. So yes, it is complex. There's a lot of moving pieces. We have a lot of players, a lot of people with different opinions. You have different levels of their leadership, all speaking to this process and as you're moving through the acquisition process. And so again, my hope here is to kind of shed some light on this process for you, and just so, and then kind of point you, and also point you in the right direction where you can go and find information on your own. Because the more you read about this process and understand it, I mean, if you're really going to try or really are working in it, it is important to understand it, because it will lessen your frustration, as you understand what we have to go through, and we're going through it together. Me as a contracting officer and you as the contractors, trust me, there is enough pain in this process to go around, and we're just working it, but we do get to the end. We do get to the end, so that is important to understand. So we are working to also maintain fairness and transparency. And so that's one of the reasons why, of course, why we're even here today, to be transparent to you about that process and help you to understand it more as well. All right, next slide. Got some building here, but not yet. Okay. You just told what.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm joking. No, it's fine. So what is source selection? So, go ahead. Yeah, next. I'm sorry. I should have brought my clicker. So it is this process, right, that the government uses to evaluate competitive bids or proposals prior to awarding the contract. Again, it's a very robust process, very time consuming. Hit it. Why? Why do we do this, right? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we do this to you? We do this because we believe that this is the most effective way to get the best value. And so when I say best value, I'm not saying cheap, right? We think probably, I know I do. Best value, I think Walmart, right? No, we're not talking cheap. We're not talking cheap. We are talking about best value is a combination. It's a combination of fair and reasonable prices. Okay, you know, cost is important. We also want quality products and services, and we want great performance. So that is the goal. So when we are trying to get, one more time for me. Actually, a couple more times. One, go ahead and hit it. There we go. Right, one more time. There we go. So we also, again, best value. We're trying to get to best value. And then fair competition. Fair competition. We want this process to be fair and transparent to the contractors, right? Amongst the contractors. So we do this by making sure that we get you the information, right? In terms of the criteria that we're going to use to evaluate your proposals and things like that. And we're making sure that we share this with all the vendors. You know ahead of time exactly what you need to submit in your proposal. And that is what we call in the ITO, section L that Jackie mentioned. The section L is going to have that ITO, the instructions to offer. You know, we love our acronyms. And then we have our section M, which is the basis of award. So, you know, we're going to provide you all of that information to give all qualified vendors that opportunity to win the contract. And then it's compliance with regulation. We have to do it. Source selection is heavily guided by federal regulations. So in particular, we have the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. We have DFARS, which is for the Department of Defense. And then now we have DAFARS. We've gotten rid of AFARS, and now we have DAFARS. So DAFARS is the Department of the Air Force Federal Regulations and Supplement, you know, because of course now we have Space Force that's included in that. Okay, next slide. So you can hit this twice too. One more time. All right. So this is a roadmap. I mean, you don't find clip art like this anymore, right? So you know this is the very old side. I mean, this thing has been around forever. And that process hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed. I mean, so this is the picture of the steps, all of the steps that we have to go through when we are doing a FAR 15 source selection. Okay, so the red boxes I have there really are those areas where your participation as contractors is critical to the acquisition process. So we're going to start here. I also needed to bring my little light thing, but folks online wouldn't have been able to see that. So the start, we have the start, and everything starts right there where we are developing the requirements and we are doing market research. Again, the red box is very important. This is where you guys as contractors could help us out, okay? We have these industry days, we have, and I'm not gonna go too far because I know that's Jason's lane. Jason's the man. So we have the industry days and we have draft RFPs where we put the draft out on sam.gov or whatever the place where we have to make sure we post our RFPs, which mainly it is sam.gov if it's an RFP. But this is where we are looking for your guidance and to give us your comments and things like that. So at the same time, we're also developing our requirements. So you see that start is kind of right there in the middle of that. We have an idea of the requirements, but then we're also looking to you as the experts to kind of help us through that process and understanding to refine our requirements. We know what we want, but you guys have, most of the time have that secret sauce, right? So Then we're moving on to planning the approach, which is the acquisition strategy. And Jackie kind of touched on that a little bit. And so there's lots of steps here. And I'm going to walk through a couple of them here. So we have our final RFP because we're trying to get to the final RFP stage. And at this stage, this is where that section M, we're developing that section M, which is the basis of award. And the section M is that document that it's like a rubric. I call it the rubric. We are telling you, contractors, this is how we are going to evaluate your proposal. And this is how, this is what we need to see from in your proposal, okay? Then we have the section L, and they go hand in hand. They're two documents that, L and M, like M&M, but L and M. So the section L is the instructions to offers. And so what we have in that document is all of the information that you need to submit in order for us to evaluate the proposal. So they go hand in hand. Before we can even send that or post that on sam.gov, we're going through it. We're going through it. We have all of the reviews that go on at the different levels. Teams are also working ACE and things of that nature. So we have a lot that goes on. Of course, planning the evaluations, and in terms of what source selection going to look like for us as a team, as a government team. How are we doing this? We're also getting our training at the ACE. We're getting our ethics training. So there is a lot kind of going on behind the scenes, right? And while you guys are preparing your proposals, because we've posted it out on sam.gov, and you guys are now preparing your proposals. That's your part. Very important. Go ahead.
Hey, Denise, could you define the SSAC and SSA on here?
Okay, so the SSAC is a Source Selection Advisory Council. That is a group of leaders who are often provide guidance to the team, to the source selection team. And so not all teams have to use that. Most of them now are getting it waived. I don't know. But if it's over 100 million, I think you should be using it, or I can't remember whether it's mandated. I can't remember which one it is. But and then MERTs and those kind of things, we don't really do much of those anymore. And MERTs were at different times of the acquisition where you have these peer reviews and things. So we're not doing too many of the MERTs. So this chart is old. So but then you have the SSA, which is the Source Selection Advisor Authority. I'm sorry, Source Selection Authority. And he or she is the person that has that final decision. They are the decision authority for that, that's going to make the decision for the award. They play a huge part down in here. Okay, so, but again, getting that final, all that information is laid out, at that time during that final RFP stage. Okay. You guys don't really, I didn't go too far deep into that because, that's our pain to bear, but, so after you guys prepared that proposal and now we have to evaluate it. Now, this is where this is kind of the long pole in the tent, because depending on the number of evaluation factors that we have put into our section M, right? Evaluation factors are those things in the proposal where we basically are looking for certain discriminators in your proposal, right? And so we are going to use these factors, tell you, the contractor, this is what we're looking for. So we have, 7, 8 factors, different evaluation factors, say under our technical evaluation. it's gonna make the source selection very long. It's gonna be a long process. We try and limit that to those important pieces in terms of what's important or what's gonna set one contractor apart from another.
How long is that process typically?
Well, this entire process, I think it's like 380 days-ish. Jason loves that question because go ahead, Jason.
So for RFP release to contract award, the standard process is 308 days. I would say that is applicable at most operating locations. At Wright Pat, when we do major aircraft buys, it takes a lot longer. But in theory, if you have about 4 offers, that's what they like to try to get 308 days. Those are calendar days. But there's a lot of depends, right? Like a contracting officer. The more offers there are, the longer it will take. More complicated, the number of evaluation factors that we ask for 15 different things, that'll take longer. So that's why we keep teams. We try to focus them on limiting the number of evaluation factors so that it doesn't take as long.
Right.
But yeah, so from the day we get the RFP, we release it and then get that.
So it's like 380 days from draft RFP to final, because normally final is 60 days.
So it's the final RFP release until award is the 308 days. So yeah, so when we release that final RFP, that includes your proposal time,
That's
getting
pretty
it
good.
in our evaluation.
And if you're doing 2 source selections that we previously discussed, is there a variance in the time? If you're doing 2 companies in source selection,
So yeah, I mean, it could take a little less.
Smaller time.
It really just depends. Yeah, that 308 is a good average. Every source selection is actually different. Like, it's hard to explain that to people.
Right.
Like in the government, on the government side, I fight this battle all the time. They want a standard, and I haven't seen a single source selection that's ever been the same as another one.
Right.
308 averages out, and take all the source selections of all of the airports, it does come out kind of average about 308, which is kind of funny because it really doesn't seem like it should.
Right. So when you said 2 source selections, what do you mean? 2 offers?
Two sources, if there are 2.
Oh, if there are 2 offers.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Mathematically correct, 1,000 pages to define number 1 as 1.
Mhm.
This is 2. So I'm involved in other source selections where I'm invited to submit raw cost. I just want to know the amount of time on that. Usually the amount of time on that is 2 weeks, 2 working weeks, like 14-ish days.
On the pricing side is what you're.
No,
Oh.
the evaluation.
The evaluation. Okay.
Get back to you.
And so that's where I was saying, so like some of those operating locations that are doing some of the contracts at the lower end of the spectrum, which generally where we see a lot of small businesses actually are a lot faster. Like, so that average is saying, like, I have seen contracts that come in, they from release to award is 90 days. And then I've seen some that could take up to 1,000 days. And then
Yeah, and F11 is different than a box.
right, and what happens is there's a larger amount of the lower dollar values, so that's why the average comes out to 308 days.
Right.
And that was just an
Exactly.
arbitrary date that someone pulled out of their hat one time and
You never know.
actually worked out.
Right.
You never know.
Right. So, yeah, so evaluating those proposals definitely can take some time. But once we evaluate the proposals, then we are moving to the to either the establishing a competitive range, or we are going to award without discussions. Most likely, I have not, I've been at the ACE now for, I don't know, 3 years. And we have not done an award without discussions. I mean, maybe it is probably more because of the value of the contracts that, or the acquisition teams that I'm seeing. So, but at this stage, after you evaluate, you can then establish what we call a competitive range. So we're going to go to the SSA, the Source Selection Advisor, you can see that there, and we're going to present to that SSA all of the information or about, what has gone on with the evaluations, which contractor stood out, what they said in their proposal, how their past performance was. I mean, anything that we said we were going to evaluate, we are now going to brief it to the SSA. And so the SSA, Source Selection Authority, is making that decision to whether to move into discussions or award without discussions. So let's just say, for example's sake, that we're going to go into, he's going to create the competitive range. He's going to do the competitive range. In that competitive range, say we got 6 proposals in. Okay, he decides, or what the team suggests, because that's all the team is really doing, suggesting that based on our evaluations, there are 4 companies, 4 offerers that we want to have discussions with. The other 2 are somewhere out there in left field. They have no idea what we're buying. They're just, you know, they don't have it. So we can either make that decision to move into discussions, because under FAR 15, in order to have discussions or have these exchanges, what the FAR calls exchanges, under FAR 15.3, we have to establish the competitive range. We have to establish this competitive range, or he can decide, he or she, the SSA can decide that, nah, we're gonna just move everybody into the competitive range, because you never know, they may get it after you have these discussions with them. Because we cannot have these discussions unless we go into the competitive range when we're doing a FAR 15. Okay,
That's a competitive price range, and competitive offer range.
that is the competitive. You said the competitive.
Well, it's either technical range or cost range.
It's all of it. It's all of it. And it depends. I mean, if you're doing LPTA, lowest price, technically acceptable, you know, you still would have that competitive range that would encompass all of it.
So you made your down select, and those are the people that the down select.
No, down select. Down select, sometimes you have a gate in the very beginning. And so you may have some offerers that are grossly insufficient, or, you know, you can.
I can't follow instructions on page count or something like that.
Those kind of things, right, exactly. So this competitive range, I have not dealt with any down selects. I mean, unless you're getting 10 and 12 offerers, but you know, we have that ability to be able to do that, but I don't even see that in section M.
So I would say, so ideally, and what I wish I would see more teams do is, we should limit the competitive range more, because it's not fair to take a company through that's not going to win. Just burns up resources, and I think it gives a false hope. But I think they're so worried about making someone mad or getting a protest early on that they say, well, let's just keep everyone in, we'll take them and maybe they'll get better.
I've seen that.
And it's unfortunate, because they should be counseling. They should be like, you know, hey, most highly awardable.
Right.
I've done a lot with the NSA. I mean, I've seen that all the time. It's like, we have the small business set aside, so instead of 12, we'll just let you all in. Right?
Yeah.
Which is why down in Maryland, they have a monthly get together to discuss how to make it more efficient. Because we're all paranoid on awarding things. They don't want to lose their job and go to break. That's why it's a cost of inertia. So if you're in the IDIQ thing,
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that too. Yeah, we're gonna talk, that's up next. That's up next. So, again, this competitive range, so we're gonna establish this competitive range. And once we establish it, now we can have those discussions. We can have those discussions where we say, hey, you know, offer A, you know, this sounds like a very, you know, good technical, you know, you looks like you are going to be able, this is a good technical, what's the word I'm looking for? Approach, thank you. Yes, this is a great technical approach, but it's risky. It seems a high risk to us. You know, can you explain this to us further, or could you do this certain thing? So you have those kind of discussions in there where you're looking at, where we as the government are looking at different parts of the proposal that we have issue with, and having those discussions. So once we have those discussions and we complete them, you know, we have another opportunity in this discussion phase to still boot those other 2 out. So let's say, for example, we did decide to bring all 6 in. Well, at this point, we can kind of decide with the SSA's approval that, you know, 2 of these are still not getting it, right? And so then, you know, we can go ahead and release them, give them their so sorry letters and that kind of thing. And then who's ever left in the competitive range now gets to submit a FPR, final proposal revision. They get to then submit that final proposal revision. So then we move to, we still got to evaluate. Once we get those proposals, we have to evaluate them, analyze those proposals, all in hopes of getting to the very end, okay? And deciding which one we're going to award to. Okay, so this is pretty much in a nutshell. And then of course we got to do our debriefings at the end. And this pretty much is the source selection process roadmap when we're doing a FAR 15. Okay, next slide. So what other selection process options are there? Ta-da! It's the fair opportunity selection process. So this is FAR 16. So on the previous slide, we talked about that FAR 15.3, which that process the government uses to award competitive proposals, to evaluate competitive proposals prior to awarding the contract, right? FAR 15. So the fair opportunity selection process is very similar, but different. You know, we like similar, but different stuff, right? And so the fair opportunity process is governed by FAR subpart 16.5. So the biggest difference here, okay, other than, of course, it's going to be ruled by FAR 16.5, the biggest difference is that we are going to award task or delivery orders under a MAC, a multiple award contract, okay? GSA has several IDIQs, like the OASIS. Anybody here or maybe even online, you guys, are you familiar? Anybody on, or maybe a contract holder on any of those? Okay. Okay, well,
Oasis.
OASIS, okay, all right, so you're familiar,
Right.
yeah, with that process. Okay, so with FAR 16.5, we're only awarding orders, okay, orders, using that fair opportunity process to contractors that are already on the vehicle, already on the IDIQ, indefinite delivery,
Definite quantity.
definitely quantity contract, right, thank you. Acronyms, they still get me, it's too many of them, So, so let's take a look at that process. Next slide, please. Oh, look at, we got the chart back. Look at that, just like that. So fair opportunity selection process. So again, many of the steps are the same. Go ahead and hit that a few times for me. So many of the processes are the same. Keep going. I think it's couple, two more. I like my animation. It's just, this stuff is not so riveting. So you gotta bring it in where you can. Okay. So this is the fair opportunity selection roadmap. I renamed it. And so as you can see, a lot of the steps are the same. However, you don't have a lot of things you don't have to do. We still got you guys there. We're still going to do our developing our requirements. We're going to do our market research. It's market research. You got to do it. Even within the, depending on how many people, especially on the GSA IDIQ. I mean, you got, I don't know, 200 people on there.
Research is limited to the contract holders.
Right. It is limited to the contract holders, of course. So yes, but you're still going to do that. You know, we don't have all the time have an SSAC. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You don't have to have that. It can be waived. Your SSA is now your source selection advisor at WritePat. I've seen several different names for them actually, but at WritePat we call it the Fair Opportunity Decision Authority. So we call him the FODA, or her, the FODA. So a lot of these processes and steps are still the same. We got to still plan for the evaluation. You guys are going to prepare your proposals and that kind of thing. And one thing I did want to bring up here is that if it's an Air Force order, under DAFARS, it tells us that we must use streamlined ordering procedures and methods. Okay? If a contracting officer decides to use FAR 15.3 to do a task order, then that has to be justified. You have to write a determination and have it, there's a process that you have to go through to do that. I can remember the day when we would do that. We would actually apply FAR 15 rules to our 16. And you think, why would you do that? Why would you take that FAR 15 procedures and force it down the throat of a 16? And it was horrible. But we did that because many of us like those guardrails. Under FAR 16, you have broad discretion as a contracting officer to develop the ordering procedures and methods and different things like that. So, as you can see, there's no need for a competitive range in this process. And why is that? Because as a PCO, I can now have discussions, or they're not even called discussions, they're called interchanges. And so I can have these interchanges as opposed to exchanges when I'm doing a FAR 15. I can have these interchanges with one, some, or all. I get to decide that, or the team decides that, whether or not we're going to have these interchanges. So you don't have to do a competitive range. There's no FPRs, no final proposal revisions. So the process overall is a lot more streamlined. And that is exactly the word that is used when you look in FAR 16. Hit the one more time. As you can see here, it tells us that the fair opportunity process is streamlined, right? There's not a lot of guardrails. Unlike that FAR 15, where there are plenty of guardrails. We also have under FAR 15, you have the DoD source selection procedures that are mandatory that you use those, over source selections over 10 million. You have to use the DoD source selection procedures. And I would say anybody who is going to, possibly use that or use, maybe enter into working in FAR 15, that they kind of peruse that document. You can Google it, DoD source selection procedures. And I think it just helps for you to kind of understand that process. If you Google it, make sure you get the 2022 version, because there is a 2016 version out there floating around, and the latest and greatest is a 2022. So as far as this fair opportunity selection process, as you can see, the contracting officer may exercise broad discretion when developing those ordering procedures. It also tells us to keep submission requirements to a minimum. Don't go asking the contractor for everything. Just whatever, the bare minimum, because we're trying, the idea here is that it's streamlined. And then it even offers, and this information is straight out of part 16.5, it tells us to use streamlined procedures, including oral presentations. So it's even throwing something out there. Hey, try this. You try oral presentation, and the last sentence there, that competition requirements in Part 6 and policies in subpart 15.3 do not apply to this ordering process. Okay, but I did tons of FAR 16 where I used 15.3 back in the day, but they changed. Now they look at you like you're crazy probably. So Next slide, please. So this one's got a lot too, so just bear with me, okay? So I wanted to just take a second just to, for those who may not understand how we got to the fair opportunity landing, right? So, because it is a process, you know, you just don't jump into the fair opportunity pool. So we, the government, we have a product or service that we are, you know, that we're trying to acquire, and that we know that we need it repetitively, and we also need to get it quickly and more efficient. So there is a pool of vendors that we know of that have an understanding and the capabilities to get this type of work done. So we conduct our market research. We kind of work that first part, that FAR 15 part. You can hit it. That source selection process, we're going to work that part. And because we want to make sure we have a robust number of vendors to compete on the vehicle, we want to follow these. We're going to follow this step. Okay, we're going to follow these steps. But in a fair opportunity, I mean, in a when we're working towards doing an IDIQ, we want to make sure that the requirements are broad, right? Because we don't want every contractor to be able to do all the work. There's some work on there that a contractor may be able to do on an IDIQ, and there may be, you know, you may be able to do more of the things on there. So you don't have to know how to do it all, but you know, there's a good portion of it that we do want you to understand. So it's usually written pretty broad. Okay, hit it one more time. So we're going to conduct a FAR Part 15 source selection. Okay, we're going to use all those DoD source selection procedures. We're going to use all of that to conduct this source selection. So any vendor who thought they could meet that requirement submits their proposal. Okay, we've got a FAR 15 now. So many times, again, and Jackie talked about it, we sometimes will have what we call an unrestricted pool, which can be large businesses or small business, and then we'll have a small business pool that is just small business. Okay, just small business. And so, you know, you submit your proposals for that, and then we evaluate those proposals, you know, following our RFP, that looking at your, you know, making sure that section L and M and all those documents are correct, and you know, you're using those as the contractor to submit your proposals. Go ahead, one more time. Okay, one more. I guess I should have did that earlier. One more time. Sorry. Okay, so we hold a competition. Okay, again, we're holding that competition in the FAR 15, and again, we have our unrestricted pool and our small business pool. So let's say, for example, we have completed the evaluations, and out of the 40 proposals, let's just say we have 40 proposals, 38 of them are going to be awarded. Multiple awards. So either, you know, we have certain number in the restricted pool, and then we have some in that small business pool. One more time. Step 3. So those who are now, we have 38 that made it into the step 2. So we have 38 now that's actually in the on the IDIQ. Step 3 is now we have some work that needs to be work that fits under the scope of this particular multiple award vehicle. So this is the point where we move from having a FAR 15 to a FAR 16. Okay, we move to, and so now in this competition, we can use all of those streamlined efforts. We can do all kinds of things that are, you know, we can you know, we have that, that's where the PCO has that broad discretion that we were talking about, okay? One more time. One more time. Okay, so step 4. So once we have held this fair opportunity selection competition, then we move into step 4, where we now can award that contract. And so again, we have held a competition, originally starting at FAR 15 and moving to a FAR 16, and are now awarding that task order to one of the 38 vendors that we suggested, or that made onto the contract vehicle. So that's kind of the fair opportunity selection process. I know it's a lot, but I just wanted to kind of show that progression to that. All right, next slide. So let's just kind of look at this in black and white really quick. Next slide, please. So there's a couple, so you could just kind of go on through it. So in a source selection process, it's an open competition to award a new contract, meaning if you can do that work, you know, think you can do that work, you can submit a proposal, okay? This is the kind of the basic procedures. Under FAR 16, you're going to award, it's only amongst the IDIQ contract holders. Those are the only folks who can submit a proposal. If you are not on that vehicle, then you cannot submit a proposal. Again, under the FAR 15, it's governed by the DoD source selection procedures. Under 16, it's exempt. You don't have to use it. SAM.gov is the posting. You have to post in accordance with FAR 15.2. We have to post our solicitations there. Under 16, you know, we don't have to post there. We can post most of the time, like what is the one we have? TSA 4 uses box.com to post their solicitations. So you don't have to use, you know, FAR 6, you don't have to use SAM.gov to post solicitations like you do under FAR 15. Next slide, please. So when we doing a request for proposal, RFP, under a FAR 15.3, under a 16, it is a fair opportunity proposal request. So under 15.3, we have our RFP that's going to establish those requirements and procedures. And when you're in that evaluation process, you must document strengths, deficiencies, weaknesses. You have to go through that whole process following the evaluation methodologies that's outlined in the DoD source selection procedures. And so that's going to include those rating tables. You got to use those. You can't defer off of those. If you do, well, you don't. So you won't do that. If you need to or want to, there's a waiver, but I've never heard of anybody asking to, you know, not use those tables. I guess you could. So I'll hit it one more time. One more time. And so under a stream, I'm using FAR 16, the methodology here, you can kind of, I don't want to say make it up, but you can. I mean, there's all kind of new stuff out here now where they're doing streamlined evaluation methodologies. And I think this is where we're lacking because we will, when we do our methodologies in our 16s, when we're evaluating, we will do this. I still see this over here. You know, I mean, sometimes it fits and you should do it, but there are many instances now where we could potentially use some of these more streamlined evaluation methodologies, which then would slim down the amount of time the evaluation process happens. Remember, I said that evaluation is kind of that long pole in the tent. Okay, one more time, I think. So past performance, here again, past performance, you know, you're going to evaluate that in 15.3, unless you get it waived, or doing an LPTA, which nobody is really doing anymore. And then requests for information here to demonstrate offer understands the requirements. So we're asking for a minimum of information, but in past performance is not required. Past performance is generally not required because we already did it at the IDIQ level. And the FAR 15 source selection.
A question, talking about TSA 4, are all of them going to be 15.3, or could a program decide have to have their selection acquisition plan do part of 16?
So TSA 4, they had to work that process. It was that 15.3 first, and now it's the 16. So all of now they're all orders.
All limited group is part of it.
Yeah, all those.
And so past performance is not required, but they're still going to look at past performance.
Past performance was,
Decide what they're going to.
but yeah, they can, because you can look at past performance amongst those 38 on the contract vehicle. But we looked at past performance
That was already done early.
early on in that
They
15.3.
may look at your past performance on the task orders.
Right.
Let's say, you're, they're gonna, maybe they could.
They could look at it. Most of the time, well, it's so early now. We just awarded that. So I mean, I don't think it's been maybe a year, if that. So yeah, it hasn't been a year. So those first few years, you're probably not going to see a lot of that, perhaps. But yeah. Yeah, no problem. Next slide, I'm sorry. So I kind of brought this up before when we talked about exchanges and interchanges with offerers. So under FAR 15.3, we call them exchanges. Under 16, we call them interchanges. Okay, and the difference there is exchanges follows those rules in FAR Part 15 and in the DoD source selection procedures. Interchanges, not so much. That's the one where I can, as a PCO, I can decide to have these interchanges or talks, discussions with the offerers with one, some, or all is what we say. We decide who we want to have these interchanges with. Okay, let's go ahead and click through it. So again, in FAR 15.3, you have policies that tell you exactly when you can have clarifications, communications, and discussions. So those are just different types of exchanges that can occur. No specific language under 16.5. Again, some, none, or all. Hit it one more time. Hit it again for me. Let's see, how many do I have on this one? No, keep going. No, I'm sorry. Didn't know what to expect. My bad. Okay, so again, here we talked about this under 15.3. You must establish that competitive range in discussions. You got to do it. Here, there's no requirement for that. Everybody in the competitive range gets we call it another bite at the apple, sort of, because you get to submit that proposal revision, final proposal revision. There's no requirement for that in a 16.5. Okay, so it's very streamlined. Okay, so this next slide, we're just going to take a look at some of the different, debriefing and protests. Yeah, we got to talk about that, right? So debriefing and protest. That's okay.
The whole thing.
That's okay. Okay. When we're talking debriefing and protests, debriefings are required for all unsuccessful offers. Okay. All actions can be protested to the GAO under a FAR 15.3. Under fair opportunity process, debriefings are required for orders exceeding 6 million. Anybody under that? I don't have to do it, but most of the time we do, because if you ask for one or have questions, it's just the nice thing to do. But again, you don't have to unless it's over exceeding 6 million and upon request. You can protest a IDIQ if they increase the scope in some way of it, if the period of performance is exceeded, or if the max value of the IDIQ they went over, you can then protest that. But I haven't seen many of those. But the important thing here is the GA protest permits protest if you're over 25 million for the Department of Defense, and if it's a $10 million for if it's a civilian agency like GSA. So anything under those numbers, no protest is going to be allowed, and no agency protests are allowed. So under a FAR 15.3, you can protest with the agency. Okay. So this next slide here, or the next, just I'm going to look at some evaluation methods, just real quick. Some evaluation methods that can be done if you're doing a FAR 16 or 15.3. So LPTA, don't see a lot of that, not a lot of that going on. Keep going. You can go ahead and just populate that whole thing. Lowest price technically acceptable. It's not really a favorite right now. You don't see a lot of that going on. I guess it just kind of was screaming too loud, the cheapest, I guess, maybe. But one more time, hit it one more time. Got a little thing down here. There in DFARS, there are certain cases where LPTA is completely prohibited anymore. Okay. Proposals are evaluated for technical acceptability. So there's no rating tables with that, either you acceptable or unacceptable. Trade-offs are not permitted, and trade-offs are those things where the government, where we can, and I'll talk about it on the next slide, but it's where you can, we can select a higher price offerer because we decided that technical was more important. And so we're going to trade off, we're going to agree to spend more to get better technical or better past performance or that kind of thing. But under LPTA, there are no trade-offs. No cost versus technical trade-offs. So this is used better if it's very simple or non-complex requirements, well-defined, and where cost is very important. Okay. Next slide. You can populate this one too all the way. So this one is the one I see one more time. I see the most often now. Trade-off method. It's the most common approach, mainly because it provides a lot of flexibility. Very subjective. Well, the source selection process is very subjective anyway, but again, cost and price is not important as other factors being past performance, technical, maybe risk, things of that nature. And again, permits those trade-off among cost and non-cost factors. Okay. So that is trade-off. Next. So I wanted to bring this one up. This is not a evaluation method, but this is more of a factor. Okay, and this is a non-cost factor, small business participation evaluations. And so this is in DFARS 215.304 requires evaluation of small business participation in other than LPT source selections whenever a subcontracting plan is required. And I brought this up mainly because a lot of acquisition teams are kind of skipping this. I don't know how, but I actually talked to somebody in small business about it. But the small business participation commitment document. And I think there's a presentation out there where teams sometimes get this confused with subcontracting plan. And this is a completely different process. This is a small business participation commitment document that says that the CEO shall evaluate the extent offerers commit to small business performance on a contract. Okay, so this is a factor that we can evaluate. We can add to our sections M. Not so much in a IDIQ contract, because most of the time that small business requirement is at the IDIQ level. Okay, but if I'm doing a FAR 16 as a contracting officer and I have a subcontracting plan, I should be doing a small business participation evaluation. Okay, and so this establishes that minimum quantitative requirement.
And this is for the prime. So this is for large businesses,
No, it's for large and small.
or large and small.
Large and small. Large and small have to submit that small business participation commitment document, both of them. It's required from both small and large businesses. And it's basically, it's giving that, saying that the contractor is going to subcontract this amount of dollars and they have to say how they're going to do it. Okay, and if they don't do it, then that is supposed to go onto their CPARs. So, yeah, go ahead.
An online question.
Oh, yeah.
If a small business is exempt from submission of the SB plan, why is the government instituting this requirement by including a small business participation evaluation?
Well, the guidance says they are leveling the playing field. Okay, so that small business is going to submit their small business participation commitment document, and they're going to use themselves. They can use themselves as that, as that number to get to that minimum quantitative requirement. Subcontracting plans are not required from small businesses. That is where that's only applicable to large businesses. The subcontracting plan. There's a very good presentation out on the web that I used, and that just explains it like so well. Like it really breaks it down. I probably maybe should have added it in here too. But again, there is this small business participation evaluation that is different than a subcontracting plan. Anytime a subcontracting plan is required, they should be doing the small business participation evaluation. I actually called over to the small business office, and yeah, so it was interesting. So anyway, let's go to the next one. And this is like kind of old too. So again, like I said, sometimes, you've been doing this and you're like, what is this? So this is another comparative analysis. This is another process that we can use to evaluate proposals, right? But this is under a FAR 16. Okay, so this is kind of some new stuff that they're doing, in terms of really streamlining this process, and but you don't want to use this for a FAR 15. You can't use it. One, because we say, in a FAR 15, don't compare proposals to each other. This process, you can compare proposals to each other. You're still going to provide evaluation, evaluation factors, but you are going to use this method to do a comparative analysis in the source selection. Okay, and so that's the process there where you read the first proposal and you're going to compare one offer to another factor by factor. I'm gonna read that proposal. I'm gonna note any things as an evaluator. I'm going to note some differences and different things that I like, attributes about it, and I'm going to roll through that and then compare that information with the second proposal. Okay, so this process though is really good for small, if you have a small number of proposals. Okay. You're not using adjectival ratings, you're not using those tables. And we get to focus on what we said was important. Okay, so these are just kind of some of the potential evaluation methods. If you're on a FAR 16, you might be seeing, that you might see. You know, it's not all the way, always going to be trade-off or LPTA. Okay, next slide. So this is another one. Now this one is good for larger groups. And so instead of one of the one most popular one that I've seen is confidence rating, right? And the confidence rating says that it's a flexible approach that focuses on how much confidence the team has that the offerer truly understands the requirement and that they're providing a sound approach, right? So it's very different because I'm going to read the proposal and then I'm going to give it a confidence rating. I'm going to say, you know, I have low, some or high confidence. And then I'm going to document my rationale instead of the other way around. Normally we document in a FAR 15, we document the rationale and what they, you know, the strengths, the weaknesses and such, and then we give the rating. In this one, you do the rating first. After, you know, you read it and then you give the rating and then you justify your rating. So instead of making instead of making the, you know, the rating fit, you know, it's just a different way, I guess, of doing it. So, but it's, you know, teams are saying it's a lot quicker, you know, and, you know, and they're getting the job done. So be on the lookout for that, perhaps. All right. I think this is the last slide. Yay, right? Some takeaways here, right? So this is regulatory compliance. We are mandated by regulation really to evaluate and promote small business participation. And so it's literally the law. And so as a small business, you are very vital to the federal government. You know, you drive innovation, you're generally more agile and, you know, providing those unique solutions. So, and you also create jobs. Also streamlined but inclusive, and I'm referring to that fair opportunity process. Agencies, you know, as a DOD or the Air Force, you know, as a contracting officer, I must make sure that there are opportunities for small business to compete when it comes to doing task orders and delivery orders, which is why you have those small business pools and that kind of thing. And then there's also opportunities, looking for those opportunities for on-ramping, what they call, you know, right? You got a 10-year IDIQ. How the heck I'm gonna get on that, right? They've already selected their favorite 38 or whatever, you know, so how, but there are on-ramping opportunities. You just have to be on the lookout for those on those different IDIQ orders. And then proactive planning. So staying engaged during that pre-solicitation phase, you know, when market research, when you see those RFIs out there, just staying engaged in that kind of thing. And I know this process is very long and that can be annoying, but, you know, hang in there. It's worth it. In the end, I think that's it for me. Yay. Any questions? None online? None in here? All right, thank you.
You had some more slides. Back up.
Oh, it was my backup, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was explaining that process but
Yeah. All right, yeah, so it's always fun to be the last guy between everyone and the end of the meeting. So I will apologize up front. So I have a weird sense of humor, so you're gonna see a lot of memes. What I'm trying to show you is the stuff that I'm training our government teams on to prepare them to do their source selections and their acquisitions. And so kind of want to just give you a peek behind what it is we're pushing so that you understand that we truly are. I think there's a belief sometimes that, programs just don't want to work with small businesses, right? They just want to go with the big guys. They don't trust, so they have their predetermined plans. And I think what you'll see is we do have a passion for it. We do push for it. I think it's been pointed out, but like, I just want to show you how we train that, right? How we're telling them to utilize small businesses. So we'll go to the next chart. So I'm going to go over market research and what we teach the teams, why it's important that you respond to sources sought and RFIs, some myth busting, issues, and then some opportunities for OTAs. So I don't know if you've heard about OTAs a lot, but that's a great opportunity to get involved, especially because of the way they're structured. So we'll get started on market research. Please, next slide. Sorry. I used to click it. Oh, you're fine.
There it goes.
All right, yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So what do we teach teams? So usually when I teach market research, I really make it very clear that market research is probably one of the most important things that a team can do in all of their acquisition planning, even leading to great execution of a program, right? Good market research was going to ensure that teams know what's out there. They're going to know whether the capabilities that they're looking for are even achievable. We have a lot of instances where business development people can get a hold of our users and sell great ideas, and then they might not be executable. And market research can kind of get through some of the promises in the marketing and get to what is really doable, right? So that we are leveling the playing field. Because I think sometimes companies oversell their capabilities and it makes them seem like they stand above the rest. And actually, technology probably is somewhere else. So market research is really important. So if we go to the next chart, I've just got a selection of the charts that I teach them, but I do share this with them every time. I stole this from Dr. Roper. I really love it because it is really the challenge that we face in acquisitions. Everybody wants us to go fast. We have to go fast, right? We're falling behind, right?
That's Ricky Bobby.
Yeah, exactly. And we got to go fast. But at the same time, in acquisitions, we have to be transparent on what we're doing, right? I have to face scrutiny. Generally, it's going to be someone in the Pentagon. It might be someone in Congress. Might be the press, depending on the level of politics that's going on, like on what we're buying. And so we've got to face a lot of scrutiny. At the same time, we're protecting the taxpayer, right? We're getting the best deal, getting that fair and reasonable price. And the only way to do that is to make decisions based on data. We've got to get away from this idea of what we always done. We're doing it because that's the way we've always done it. We're doing it because I think that's what's going on, these emotions, these assumptions, and get the facts. And market research helps us do that. So that's why I like to share this one. He briefed totally some different topic, but I just thought it was really great, so I stole it. So next chart, please. So I usually get into why we do market research. Generally, they say because we have to. That's true. I get that a lot less now, and that's good. And that's a shift amongst our people. We do have to do market research, but there's really a reason why. It really does reduce protest risk. Everybody's worried about a protest. Nobody likes being protested and definitely don't like to lose them. I can't promise that they won't get protested, but what I can tell them is doing good market research and communicating what we need to industry not only allows you guys to understand exactly what we're looking for and able to give us a proposal that actually meets the mark rather than, trying to guess and read our minds. At the same time, we understand what's going on in industry. And if we do a good job and we communicate, we actually build some transparency and trust that we actually are trying to compete something. I think historically, we did not do a great job. When I've been in this field for 23 years, early on, we would put out something, we'd say, hey, we're going to compete this, but everybody knew where it was going and who was going to win it. And it was just going through the motions, right? We can't do that anymore. And we should never do that because that's not really fair to you guys. And it's not fair to us and the taxpayer and the warfighter, right? Because there's a lot of technology that's out there that if we aren't doing our due diligence, we're missing out on it. So I think when we build that trust and everyone knows that, hey, we're really going to compete this and we really mean it. I think that flows all the way through the source selection. And I think what happens is when you get down to that source selection, and we built that trust early on through market research, and then we built that through the industry day, and we did everything we said we're going to do in the source selection. It may not go your way, but you feel like, hey, they did exactly what they said they were going to do. And I think that's really important. I think that does help. It improves competition. right? So the more that we can expand our reach to non-traditional contractors and small businesses, there's a lot of great stuff that's going on out there that don't usually work with us, right? Whether because that belief that they can't get in, or sometimes we just have regulations that make it not fun to work for us, or whatever that may be. But if we can do a good job and bring them in and get them involved, we usually find great innovative solutions. We get better competition. We usually lower prices. It forces our traditional contractors to sharpen their pencil and do a better job. And that's good for everyone. It improves our strategy outcomes. It speeds up acquisitions generally. Some people think market research, gosh, if I do that, it's going to take longer. I would say, given what we found, if you do good market research and you found it and you have a good plan, you can get it done in a relatively short amount of time. But the time that you're saving on the back end is much more than if you don't do a good job. Because if you don't do good market research and you're not prepared and you get 50 proposals, we talked about the length of source selection. If I thought I was only get 5 and I get 20, my schedule just got blown up, right? If I would have known ahead of time, I could have planned for that. I could have built for that. Because the minute you lose time on schedule, you start having to brief all the time while you're falling behind, and you just fall further behind. So just being prepared for it helps. I just remind them, it's not just a box we check. And I think that's really important. And I think that's what we hammer home in the ACE is it's not just a box. We really have to do good market research. Next chart. So I just point out to teams that this is a team sport. It's not just contracting. It's not just program managers. Everyone is involved. And I just want to point out, I really tell them to get their small business person involved early on. A lot of people like to avoid that as much as possible, especially if they don't know how they feel about it, But if you get your small business person involved early, they start to see the same information that we're seeing. So if we come to the conclusion that, hey, there's some growth in the small business world, but it's not there yet, they can't be a prime, then they're going to be able to understand that and accept that as we make those determinations. And then they can communicate that to you guys in the future as well, like here's where we're going. Yeah, trying to keep everyone involved because the things I look for in a market research is not the same. You start talking technical, my eyes glaze over. You want to talk budget. If you have the money, I'm good. I'm worried about that deal, right? I want to get a good terms and conditions. I want competition. So it's important that they are involved so that they know that they're getting what they want. Next chart. So there's a process, like I said, I'll use a lot of memes, but the next chart is the process I usually show them. There's no, if you go to the next chart, please, sorry. So there's no magical process. They're all the same. So I usually, use this one. It's a great kind of indicator of what they can do. They're going to define the requirement, develop their strategy, do the research, document their findings, hopefully use the results. That's really where I like to get them to. Not everyone does. And then sometimes that starts the loop again, but kind of like to show them, this cycle. The next chart, please. So when I talk about defining the requirement, obviously we talk about all the things about historical, have we done this before? Is this a follow-on? But one of the areas I like to point them to is the NAICS code. A lot of contractor officers don't think about that. They use the one that's always been used before. The NAICS code drives the size of small businesses. So 9 times out of 10, probably 9.9, most organizations have one NAICS code they use. It's probably the only one that applies. That's going to drive things. I was on a source selection for NASIC for the ATEP2. It was a services contract. We were challenged to change the NAICS code to use a different NAICS code. We did that. We ended up getting a small business size standard of 1,500 employees was a small business. That opened the world a lot to a small business set aside. And we took $1 billion contract that had been done by the same 3 large contractors for 30 years, and we were able to set it aside for small business, all by challenging the NAICS code and getting a new NAICS code that could increase the size of a small business. So super important for them to think about. It doesn't always play into it, but it might. Next chart. When they're thinking about their market research, they need to think about the goal of their market research. Why are they even doing this, right? And the number one thing I like to point out is you need to identify any small businesses out there that can do the work. We need to at least think about that, right? We can't just default to what we assume is that only big companies can do it. And so that's kind of the takeaway here. But obviously, we're looking at a lot of other things. Can we compete this? Obviously, that's pretty important. But again, I'd like to point out, we're trying to see, is there any small businesses that can do the work? Next chart. So I like to remind them that everyone has assumptions. That's normal. I get it. But we really need to minimize those. We need to list them, and we need to figure out how we're going to challenge those assumptions through our market research. The idea is that just because company X has always done it, does not mean that they are the only company that ever could do the work. We have to put in some effort to see if there's somebody else out there that can do it as well. So I challenge them to minimize those assumptions and focus on those facts and data. So we can go to the next chart. So I've talked to different ways to do their market research. I won't go through all of them with you. So, but I do like to point out that I hit them right away with talking with their small business specialist, working with the procurement center representative, searching the dynamic small business search tool Jackie mentioned. These are all things that the contracting officers and the team should be looking at right away. It's quick and easy. It doesn't take a lot of time to reach out and start that process. So we hit them with that. Next chart. We have a bunch of other ones we have in there, but we also get into the open research, right? There's obviously internet is an easy source to use. And so we encourage them to use that, but obviously use some common sense. Not everything you find on the internet is true. And so there's, in any part of market research, there's an inherent amount of critical thinking that has to happen, right? We have to think about, you know, when we get sources and information comes to us, is there any bias in there? You know, if I'm talking to the user, he probably likes his incumbent. He probably is going to tell you that's the only person that could ever do the work. I can take that in as a fact, but that doesn't mean it's the only fact, right? So I have to have some judgment on my side to think through, to see if there is another side of the story. Again, get away from those assumptions. Really encourage them to use industry trade shows if possible. That's a great way to find new sources. Yes.
I really like the quote now.
Yeah, that was a great quote that Dave had. Yeah.
I was like, did you say something about the internet?
We are in a world where if you put a picture and a name, that's automatically a quote. So
I think that's good when I read it.
yeah, right, yeah. So yeah. So yeah, so just trying to just point out there's a lot of information out there, and I apologize, I did skip. So sam.gov is probably the best place I'll point contractor or contract officers to for ATEP 2. So when we were looking, we put out an RFI, right? And we heard from the same 3 contractors that had always done the contract. So we kind of made the program manager kind of said, see, I told you there's no one else that can do this. It's the 3 companies. Well, I did the extra step of going out and searching the terms of, you know, GeoInt and Mazin, right? Those are the things we were going to buy, some of the capabilities. And then I found contracts for the GSA, the other CIA and the NGA and all these intelligence agencies. And then I looked and I'm like, oh, here's our interested parties. Those are totally different companies than we work with. And so we reached out to them and we said, hey, I put out this RFI, you didn't respond. Well, they said, well, we didn't even look for it because we've never gotten any work from the NASIC. And so we took that extra step to reach out and say, hey, you could do this work, look at our requirement. And then next thing you know, not only could they do the work, but they ended up being a small business set aside. So there is some work that's required. A contracting officer cannot just do the easy button, send out the RFI, and if they don't hear back, go, I guess that was that. So we encourage them to say, look, if you're doing some initial searches on the internet, you find companies and you put out an RFI and you don't hear from them, reach out to the company. Like it might be that they just don't think you really are going to compete it because you never have, or maybe they didn't see it. Sam.gov has a million opportunities and you can only pick so many that you can follow up on. So the key for us is to get away from this idea of I put out an RFI and I didn't hear anything, so there's no small business. Move on. So there's some work on our part, right? We have to do a better job. At the same time, sometimes you guys don't respond to RFIs, maybe because you're too many of them or because they don't result in the actual contract. You know, sources sought are more, you know, those lead to more work. But I think some of the people in the government interchange the terms. Sources sought and RFI are the same thing with some buyers, even though they have different connotations. So we really hit upon them that they've got to do some work. It's got to be more than just going through the motions. Next chart. So industry engagement is by far the best means for us to get market research, meeting directly with companies. We're going to get more from that than we'll ever get just from looking on the internet and just reading an RFI response, because we can ask questions. I can ask about your solution. You can ask me about my requirement. You could say, hey, did you consider that the way you wrote this requirement lends yourself to awarding to one person? Maybe you want to think about changing that. We changed things because of that, because we truly wanted competition. So we made major changes in our requirements and how we're going to evaluate things. But we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't had that conversation, because sometimes there's just unintended consequences of the way we say things. But like I said, the sources sought synopsis, great starting part. The RFIs are great. But again, I think the thing with RFIs is not everyone sees that as a potential contract. And again, you have the limited resources, you have to focus on where you might be able to get a contract. So I think we're trying to educate our people to be smarter about it, but just understand, I have a whole nother briefing after this to talk about the RFIs, but those are ways for us to get that information. Next chart. And so, I bring it home, but one thing I really like to hammer home for them is they need to become an expert in what they're buying. I think in this world, we get too focused on, just punting or going for the easy button, and they truly need to be experts on what they're buying, because it's hard to go through this entire process and do a source selection and not have a clue on what it is you're buying. So I try to make them a more informed buyer and become an expert. And I think that we try to, in this world of AI, right? Proposals are going to start being written in AI. We're going to start analyzing them in AI, and then eventually we're going to lose all capability to understand what's really going on. AI is a great tool. It will help us move faster, but we still have to do the work ourselves because we need to know what we're buying. So I think that's the last thing on this one. So next chart, please. Sorry. So like I said, going to get into the responding to sources sought and requests for information and why that's so important. So next chart, please. So just a little light reading from the FAR here, but why do we do these things, right? Sources sought, notice, improves small business access by enhances competition. It's our job to review acquisitions, determine if they can be set aside, and we shall perform market research and document why we're not setting aside the small business, right? At the same token, we have RFIs. They're out there. They can be used when we don't necessarily intend to award a contract. So I think that's why some people see an RFI, they think, well, they're not really doing anything just yet. But we still do use that as a technique for conducting that market research. So while, if we go to the next chart, I think it'll actually cover this. Getting ahead of myself. Yes.
So there's an advantage for the government on the RFI market research. Companies get in the penalty box. If they don't respond, I always respond anyway because I want to get on the list.
Right. So
questions, but
there's no requirement that says you have to respond to an RFI or even a sources sought. It's just helpful, right? It helps us understand who's out there. But when the RFP comes out, you can still bid. I think there are rare, limited circumstances where maybe the requirement is so vital that they need that input that they might make a requirement. But even still, I think if you challenge that, you can't be penalized for not responding to an RFI. The penalty is actually probably more because if you don't respond and then they don't get more than 2 small businesses and they don't set it aside, and now you have to compete against the big guys, that's where you would fall short. Like that is an unintended
case where take a good small business, right? So you got the 8A status for A and C, whatever. You take the RFI, do such a nice job on the response, they can shift to the sole source acquisition. Do you see that happening much? It's happened to us.
Yeah, definitely. So everything that we do in market research is helping us drive that acquisition decision, right? So if it makes sense or it can speed things along, right? If I can set it aside for an 8A, well, and that I see that as a solution to get there quicker, then that might be what they do, right? If you respond, you do a great job, right? And that's why the RFI is really important. But I just want to point out that sources sought notices and RFIs are usually used interchangeably when it comes to government people, especially now that we're having a lot of people retire and we're getting a lot of new people that are new to the workforce. And so these terms have specific meanings, but they kind of get thrown around equally anymore. So when you see them, think of them as the same, even though we know they're not, because just because it's an RFI doesn't mean it's not leading to a requirement. It probably is going to lead to a requirement. They're just trying to decide how to do that. Next chart. Oh, did it go? No, it didn't go. Okay. So why should you respond? Well, obviously, if you respond, you're going to help distinguish yourself and your solution. It's going to open opportunities. It helps build relationships. We now know you exist. We may not have known. Maybe we didn't do maybe not everyone does market research like I do, where I actually try to find people. They're just relying on the responses. So if they hear from you now, they know you exist. Hopefully we're leading towards that contract, and now you're now aware of it. You're likely saw it on sam.gov. You've said you're an interested party. You're going to start hearing about it more and more every time we update information and documents. You're going to possibly influence how we package, whatever that contract may be. And hopefully in the form of, if there's more than two of you, we're gonna set it aside, right? If we get two small businesses that can do the work, and can do it, at a reasonable, fair market price, then we have to set it aside. But if we don't hear from you, it's an easy button, even though you exist, and we should have found you anyway. But a contract officer is gonna point to it and say, I put out an RFI and I didn't hear from two small businesses, so I'm not setting it aside. Now, should they have done the work? Should they have found you anyway? Absolutely, but they won't, because they're got 150 things going on and they need to just get this out the door, and they're hoping you're gonna respond. And if you don't, then they say, well, I did my job. And yes.
It's an online question. They ask, where do capability statements come in?
So actually I have a good lead into the chart here. So if we go to the next chart, I think we'll see, hopefully, or it will come in. So how to respond, right? So it's important that we're not just doing the auto pre-written, like, here's my generic marketing spiel I'll do to everyone. Make sure it's focused to what the team was asking for. This is where we're going to talk about those capability statements, and you're going to share, is it general knowledge? Is it detailed knowledge? Have you had experience as a prime or a sub? That's really important to know, right? Because, maybe the team needs, it's really important for them to have someone who's been a prime before, because there are certain things with that relationship that have to happen. Make sure you're addressing everything, right? Each element and task specifically. In fact, if you can do it task by task, even better. Contract experience, past performance. Again, that helps with that credibility. You're great, but you have to convince somebody in the government who's probably in their mind has somebody whispering that no small business can do this. This is only the big guys can do it. So sell yourself, right? I mean, that's part of the deal, right? Next chart.
Can I say
Yeah,
something,
absolutely.
Jason?
Please.
I just wanted to add, okay, so the question online about the capability statements. For small business, they have a typical capability statement that you have, right, and that you hand out. And I would just say, when it comes to this, is that capability statement could be used maybe for an introduction to an office or to an organization. But the important thing here, when it comes to a sources sought or an RFI, make sure that you're responding to what the sources sought or RFI is asking for. Because if your capability statement does not, then it won't satisfy what they're looking for, and you may not be considered capable of doing the work. So make sure that you're addressing what's in the RFI or capability or in the sources sought. Many times your capability statements are rather general. So just make sure, just because it says, yes, I can do this work in the snakes code, you still have to address what's being asked for. And it's typically more details.
I tell you, I've run $17 million so far this year, 6 months. You do accept what you suggest. I write that solicitation as it's a full blown solicitation. Then I shape it and see if I can get sole source. But it may be 47 pages, because you know what? It's not going to be a most cases page anyway. Right. So you can showcase your talent, your past performance, right? Much better than you do.
It sounds like you're taking the RFIs pretty serious.
Well,
No, I think that's good.
Yeah, number one, it's good for your, proposal process. Number two, if I'm starting to get to know you, if I write it based on what I think, a technical solution, you might, and someone gets a capability, you might say, hey, who is this company? I might want to talk to them, right? So, but it does take a lot of work.
Good, yeah, and that's the balance, right? It's a lot of work, and it may not turn into anything, but sometimes it may not instantly win you this contract, but it now, I remember that company, and I have this requirement, I have a set aside for, or I've got something directly that relates to that. It does build those relationships, so that's a great point. Next chart. So try to, relate with the program, right? Have you ever worked with us or any other government agency? That adds credibility, right? So if you've worked with other government agencies, you're going to make those people feel more comfortable. Government contracting people, acquisition people are not bad people, but we have a lot of pressures on us to execute a program, and we have to make a lot of people happy. and we take a lot of lumps. So we're balancing, right? We want to include small business, but we also don't want to get, put on the front of the Washington Post for being a contract that failed. So anytime you can show us examples of where you've done it before, that helps. It takes those walls that they've kind of put up down, I think, right? Not everybody is open-minded as myself. Obviously make sure that you understand the scope of the contract. Sometimes, and this is where I think we're going to see issues with AI. I think people are going to run what we put through into AI and have it spit something out. And I think we're going to be more strict about looking at those. So make sure that you can show that you actually understand what it is and you didn't just run it through and regurgitate it back to us with some kind of AI thing. Like, show your expertise. This one's actually kind of big. If you're trying to unseat an incumbent, if this is a follow-on, show a plan on how you're going to transition, because sometimes they're just scared. They say, I can't go to somebody else because I don't have time to do the transition. So if you can show how you can transition it, that's a big step to help get an office on board to say, okay, maybe I can do this, right? Because again, you're battling against sometimes just assumptions that they have. And so, anything you can do, always respond by the deadline. Obviously, if it doesn't come in on time, they may not look at it, and then you wasted your time. Next chart. So why should I do this, right? Why should you respond? Well, obviously, writing that effective capability statement, answering the direct requirements that we're looking for, allows us to determine if there are 2 or more of you out there that can do the work. And then now, once there are 2 or more of you, I have to set that aside, right? So now you just take in a world where you might have to fight off all the big guys, and you've shrunken it down to just, your peers, right? The people that, anytime I can compete against a smaller pool of people, that's great. And then this is going to seem counterintuitive, but if you have a competitor that's in the field, make sure they know about it and that they respond. I know it seems like maybe I just want to leg up on somebody and I'm not gonna let them know, but if there aren't 2 of you, I might not set it aside. So sometimes it makes sense to let others in your field know and say, hey, have you seen this response or this requirement? Maybe we should look into this. At least we improve our chances. Next chart. Any questions there? Speeding through here. All right. So these are just some myth busters. These actually came from some DoD memos with regards to source selection and communication with industry. So I just wanted to hit a few of these because I think they're actually pretty good. So if we go to the next chart. All right. So the first myth is that we can't meet one-on-one with the government to discuss a requirement. I can tell you there are government people that thought this was true, probably as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. Just that this fear, we have this fear of just, we don't want to do anything that gets me protested or get me in trouble. And if I talk to someone, I might not, I might be giving an unfair advantage. But if we click here, and the fact is that we can and usually do meet one-on-one with potential offers. The key here is I can't give anyone any preferential treatment. So as long as I give the same information to everyone, that does not mean I have to meet with everyone. So I don't have to meet with every company, but I have to, if I share something in that meeting that could be useful, I'm just gonna have to post that on SAM, right? SAM.gov. So I'm gonna say this question was asked and here's how I answered it. As long as I do that, I'm good to go. I can talk to companies. I don't have to make you talk to me. If you don't want to talk to me, I'm not going to beg you to. But if I reach out and I talk to companies, that's awesome. I get more information. I can ask questions. I can say, hey, you saw these documents. What do you think about those? Is that going to get you to bid? And you might go, no, I feel like it's just written for company X. And then we go back and we decide, can we change that? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. If the team's doing a good job, they're going to make changes to make maximum competition possible. Next chart.
Jason, I just wanted to add on to that. We can do that. There's one-on-ones, but typically that's before the solicitation is released.
Correct. Yeah, that's during the market research phase, right?
Right. Before and the other thing too is I just want to say to small businesses out there, to the listeners, is basically we want to make sure we share what we shared with you in a one-on-one with everyone, but we're not going to share if you're sharing or talking a little bit about your unique approach with us, we're not going to share that.
Right. generally what you bring up is not going to be shared. It's not going to be shared. It's not generally. We won't share that. If I, in response to something you say, give you some insight to the requirement that maybe clarifies something, I'm going to have to share that.
If the conversation results in something and we say, oh gosh, we need to clarify that requirement, we're going to share that with everyone.
Right. So the second myth, and this is kind of on the government side, but a protest is something that we want to avoid at all costs, even if it means that we limit conversations with industry. So this is kind of the same feel, but if we go to the fact here, the fact is, yeah, all right. So just because we don't have communication isn't going to prevent a protest. Nothing can prevent a protest. I report that on Teams all the time. In fact, it's more likely that they'll get a protest if they aren't communicating, because there isn't that back and forth. There's no general understanding. So it's more likely there could be a misunderstanding. There's a more likely that there isn't that trust built where you feel you're getting a fair shake, and you're more likely to get a protest by not talking to companies than you would just having those conversations. So again, we tell teams all the time, it's absolutely better and essential to talk to contractors and not just avoid them. Next chart, myth 3. So industry days and similar events attended by multiple vendors are low value to industry and the government because industry doesn't provide useful information from their competitors and the government doesn't release new information. That is a mouthful. And as a quote, so if we click on the fact, actually a well done industry day, which includes one-on-one sessions. So I think if you were just to do an industry day with a generally open environment where you don't meet one-on-one contractors, this could be true. I've been to industry days that are like that. It's not necessarily wrong. But if we have those one-on-one sessions where we can have those conversations, where we can talk about documents and your approach and have that back and forth, it can be very valuable. Also, industry day is good opportunity. So we have these requirements that keep getting bigger and bigger, where no one company can ever do everything. So teaming is going to happen. And while some people have their teams made, there's others that just maybe have the 80% solution. If they can find their match, right, their partner that makes them part of that competitive world, then that's better for us. And so by us having industry days, having the ability to put out who's involved, who's out here, what are their capabilities, then you might find a partner or someone might find the missing piece, and now we have another competitor. So that's awesome for us. So industry days are really very important for us. So we really push those on teams.
Well, it's also important for our small businesses because it does afford you the opportunity to meet people you can team with.
Right.
So super.
Right.
As well as industry, I just got to put a plug in. I like these Smith clusters. Also plug in for the industry associations that are out there, like AFCA, like the Women in Defense, et cetera, that are out there to afford you the opportunity to meet your well, the big guys call each other competimates, right? Lockheed refers to Boeing as a competitor, right? Because they compete, but they also team. And so I think that's what small business needs to do as well, kind of take a page from that book.
All right. To develop my new proposal, I don't really need to tailor my solution to a specific solicitation since the government won't read my proposal that closely anyway. This made it in a DoD memo, so obviously someone believes that. Obviously, I hope everyone understands you cannot get away. So we bring up the fancy chart here. So obviously, you got to tailor your approach to evaluation criteria, the proposal instructions, obviously the specific requirements. We just talked about that evaluation process. If you don't answer it properly, you could be thrown out without ever even getting a chance to have those discussions.
Yeah, that is true. Formal government, but on source selections, and we read, and if it doesn't meet the evaluation criteria, obviously you didn't answer the question.
And
Right.
don't assume that we know, just because we may, they know I've done this work.
Right. Well, and also even the instructions for page count, font size, I've seen people get thrown out for those things because it seems silly, but some of it is like attention to detail. So if you're working with us, like there's sometimes we need someone who can follow the requirements. So it's really important that you give us everything that we ask for specifically. Next one, I think this might be the last one. If I lose the competition, I shouldn't bother asking for a debriefing. The contract officer won't share any helpful information with me. So hopefully everyone understands that is a myth. The fact is, you should always ask for a debriefing. understand why you didn't win. Make sure that you can gather information from that so that you can be a better contractor in the future. I've seen teams that come through and go through the, debriefing and actually use that opportunity to better themselves. Understand, where did I do well? Because there's some you did well. There's gonna be some things you might have just missed on. And then you can make those changes, and we've seen them come back and be successful after that. Don't just, either waive your rights or don't do that. The idea here is we're not going to the debriefing necessarily. It's not an opportunity. You could find information that might help you in a protest, but I hope what it's doing is growing you to be a better competitor in the future. That's our goal. It's not just to go through the motions. We really do want to build a strong defense base. I know it's hard to believe, but we don't like working with the same contractors all the time either. Like, we do like some competition. It's nice to not get stuck and tied to one contractor for the rest of our lives. And they stop listening to us and they start doing what they want to do. So it works both ways, but definitely get your debriefing and make sure that you're getting information. It also should leave you, hopefully, with that confidence that we did the same things we said we were going to do. It's our job to instill that confidence to say, here's what I said I was going to evaluate you on. This is what I did. Here's how you came out of that evaluation. And I followed through with what I said I was going to do. If you don't get that feeling, then it is your right to protest, because if they didn't treat you fairly, you should protest. I'm not get in trouble, don't strike me down, government guys, but really, that is your right. You need to understand that you were treated fairly, and so don't just skip the debriefing. Next chart might be in the last. All right, so just wanted to talk a little bit about other transaction authorities. I don't know if you've heard about these. So Dr. Roper made a very big deal about these a few years back. In fact, there was a period of time where I think he said all acquisitions should be OTAs, which caused a lot of heartache within the government on how do we do this. So I just wanted to talk about them a little briefly. So we go to the next chart. So first of all, why are we going rapid, right? You hear this all the time. We don't have that competitive military advantage that we used to have. We used to be ahead of our near peers, as we used to call them. Now they're our peers. And so obviously that's not a good thing. As we talked about, it takes a long time to get things on contract. Generally 10 plus years from development to fielding if we're doing well. I've seen situations, there's histories of weapon systems where we said we developed a fighter for a certain fight, and then by the time it was delivered, that war was over, and now it's useless. Those kind of things. So we have to figure out how can we go faster? How do we shorten that cycle time? So that's why we're being pressed to go rapid. And so the other transactions are a way to do that. So if we go to the next chart, I believe, so OTAs were created in 1958 from the NASA Space Act. So 60 years ago, these have been existing. They're new to us, but they aren't new in theory. If you notice, from 2012 to 2015, the entire government the Air Force did about 50 OTAs, which about $200 to $500 million. And in 2020, we did 700 OTAs for about $8 billion. So certainly the DoD is taking the mantra of actually doing OTAs and moving forward with those. If you're familiar with Kessel Run, that started out as a prototype OTA. I'm pretty sure SpaceX was an OTA. So there's a lot of examples of these things that came from great technologies that have come from OTAs. So if we go to the next chart, why is it so popular? There's less rules and regulations. We love when we don't have to follow FAR 15. You thought FAR 16.5 was wild and crazy. OTAs are even crazier. There's no rules. There's no defined rules. It's a blank sheet of paper. So there's lots of flexibility. I put an asterisk on this one that wasn't in the originally, but fast track with some timelines. Generally, when we're good at it, anytime we do something new in the Air Force, we usually get very concerned we're going to screw it up. So we usually take longer than what it should. I've seen OTAs that can be done in 30, 60, 90 days. I've also seen some people work on OTAs for over 2 years. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go fast, and you shouldn't choose it. We shouldn't be choosing it just to go fast, but it does generally speed things along. It has an ability for us to go straight into production from a prototype. So if we compete the prototype, we can go straight into production without competition. So obviously there's some speed there. But the reason we do this is because we want to work and partner with non-traditional contractors. Again, we're trying to find those solutions, those contractors that have really great solutions that we don't normally get contracts with, right? So for whatever reason, they're not working with us. Maybe it's because they're just not interested in working with the government. Maybe they don't like the FAR. There's rules in there that they don't like to follow. Well, now the FAR doesn't apply, so maybe they want to work with us. So we're trying to get that new and emerging technology. So if we go to the next chart. So what is another transaction? It's basically defined by what it's not. It's not a procurement contract, so it's not ruled by the FAR or the DFARs, and it's not a grant or a cooperative agreement, so it doesn't fall within Dodgers. So it is literally what it's not. It's an agreement. It's another way to get something on contract, but it's not within the regular federal regulations. So if we go to the next chart. So there are 3 types of OTAs. I'm focusing on other transactions, prototype projects, because those are the ones you'll see mostly, at least at LCMC level. The other 2 are reserved for the labs. So you might see those in the lab setting. Those are for research and experimentation. But we focus a lot on the prototypes, and that's the area where we've been encouraged to do more. So that's a lot of the National Defense Authorization Act actually opened this up to let us use more of those. So we go to the next chart. So I'm not going to read the definition of a prototype for you. I can tell you that everything could be a prototype. I could drive a truck through that definition. Anything in the world could be a prototype. But it has to be directly relevant to enhancing the mission effectiveness. So it has to be something that advances the state of the art, that it's new, it's a different way. It has to be done, in a way we've never done it before, and it's a prototype, as long as it's advancing our capabilities at the same time. We need to compete these to the maximum extent practical. So again, this isn't another opportunity for us to go straight to one company. We are wanting to compete because, again, we're trying to figure out what's innovative and new. Next chart. So in order for us to use this, we have to do one of these things, right? So in order for it to be a prototype, we either have to award to at least one non-traditional defense contractor or nonprofit research institution that participates to a significant extent in the prototype project. Significant extent is not defined by law. There is no dollar threshold or percentage of work that defines what significant extent is. So there's a lot of leeway in there, but there's a lot of opportunity because the non-traditional defense contractor, small businesses are non-traditional defense contractors. So that's why I say this is a good opportunity. So the Army has a great example that when they do a lot of these, they've been doing it for a long time. They had one where they said, hey, we have this mission, we have these tanks, they need to be able to use any type of fuel that they find, because in the battlefield, there's fuel from all the different kinds. So they put an OTA out, and obviously no non-traditional company or small business was going to build tanks for them, but they did. A very small company came up with a algorithm. It didn't take them a lot of time. It didn't cost a lot of money, but it was crucial for putting it into the tank so that they could convert this fuel. And so then, we were able to do an OTA for that. So the company had this great idea, and it worked really well. And I think one of the reasons he didn't want to work with the government is, I kid you not, he did not like the Drug-Free Workplace Act requirement in the FAR. So he had no intention of ever working with the government. So they did an OTA, and they took that out of there because that was not required. So there's a freedom and flexibility that there are things about the FAR you don't like, regulations that are really against. OTAs allow us to negotiate those. If we don't have that, then all the participants have to be small businesses or non-traditional defense contractors. That's awesome. That's right up your guys' alley. If we don't do that, then we have to get 1/3 of the total cost of the prototype project paid for by someone other than the federal government. In theory, that's the prime contractor. So if we don't use a small business or non-traditional, then the primes would have to put in 1/3 of the cost. That doesn't happen a lot of times. Certainly, they don't like to put up any of their money. We do see venture capital coming into this now. So venture capital companies are coming in and putting in money, helping develop technologies. So that's interesting. I don't know how that'll play out in the end of things, and then the final is we can get a waiver. I don't think in the 60 years that they've done this, anybody's gotten that waiver. The Army asked us if we knew how to get a waiver, and they've been doing it a lot longer than we have. You just don't get waivers for that. So we're gonna have to fit somewhere in there. So it's very likely we're gonna be pushing for more small business, more non-traditional contractors.
The SP is the senior.
Next chart. Oh, yes.
So how do consortiums come into the mix? Aren't they the same as OTAs, pretty much?
Yeah, consortiums. So think of consortiums as the multiple award IDIQ of the OTA world. So we can award an OTA directly to a company, or we can award to a consortium, which is a collection of lots of non-traditional contractors and small businesses that then could compete for those requirements. So it's all in the way we'd execute the OTA. It's obviously a lot easier. So usually there's a consortium company who gets a small fee to do that work, but then they actually have that, by doing it more often, they actually speed the process along versus us. If I've never done an OTA and it's my first time, probably gonna take me a little longer. So that's why consortiums exist, and they're a collection of contractors and non-traditional defense contractors. So next chart, I think, is the definition of a non-traditional defense contractor. Oh, that's why it's important. It's important because if one of the reasons is we use all small businesses. So sorry, I said I use memes a lot. Non-traditional defense contractor is defined. Basically, you haven't performed a contract for at least 1 year preceding the solicitation for a DoD contract that's subject to the full cost accounting standard. That's why small businesses are not considered traditional, because generally you don't have to apply with full accounting standards. The same with commercial companies. So if it's commercial, if it's nonprofit, educational and small businesses, they all generally do not have that full accounting standard. Therefore, they're non-traditional. So that's the definition and why that works. Next chart. So I mentioned we can go into full production. There's an ability to go into a non-competitive follow-on production of an OTA from that prototype OTA. So as long as we competitively awarded the prototype the first time around, we let everyone know that there was a potential of us doing that follow-on production, and then that the prototype was successfully completed. Then we can go ahead and award a contract directly off of the prototypes. We don't have to go back and do all the steps that we normally have to do. Successfully completing a prototype is defined by the team of the government. It is not 100% successful completion. It could be 80%, 90%, whatever makes sense. But again, we're making a decision to go into production. So we need to make sure that it's probably a pretty good solution. I wouldn't want to go into full rate production if it's not a fully fleshed out idea. But the reason why this is attractive to programs is, hey, someone has a great technology. They show me a prototype. It works really fast and I can get it straight into production. Let's do that, right? There's a lot of opportunity to speed things along. Next chart. So yeah, so I mentioned that successful completion. It's something that you're going to define. Basically, you, the government, we're going to define it. It's going to have key technical goals, and has the project met that. There's going to be some success metrics that we'll define ahead of time, and then if it accomplished a particularly favorable or unexpected result that justifies that transition to production. So again, a lot of leeway for the government to be pretty free with what they describe that to be. So you can see why this might be attractive to program managers who are asked to go fast, maybe do something really quickly. And a prototype can be determined to be successful prior to the conclusion of the prototype project. So let's say the prototype project's still going on, you want to do some other tweaking and things. You can still do tweaking and improve the prototype, but go into production before that happens. They are allowed to do that, as long as that's one of the ways that you defined what completion was. Next chart. That's it. Awesome. So yes.
Got a question here. Is there a push for contracting officers to use interested vendor versus feature posting?
That's a great question. I don't know that. Yeah, I've never thought about. I just always use it, but I think you're right. Not every SAM listing has that. I know that we suggest it. I can't say every agency does that. Certainly, like I said, if it wasn't for that list of interested vendors, I wouldn't have found the contractors that we did for ATEP 2, because I wouldn't have known that they existed. Because some of the work that's done, like that's a pretty interesting line of work, and you can't just go to Google and look up GeoInt and Mazint and find companies that do that work. So there is some level of secrecy in that career field or that industry. Yeah. So, but because they had posted their interested vendors, I was able to find them, and I just wrote emails to each one of them. I said, "Hey, you interested?" So, but I don't know there's a requirement. So, but we do push teams locally. Definitely do that.
More questions?
Is that it?
That was it. That was all I got.
Okay. I just wanted to add here on some of these questions, your small business professionals, your small business organizations out there are a good point of contact with your question, if you have questions, right? Or, excuse me?
Or Apex Accelerator.
Well, that's earlier in the process, right? Your Apex accelerators can help you there, but when you're in this process, right? Or you're, I really like the myth buster about, or I think what Jason talked there about, if you know your small business competitor, is also bidding on something, and you're of the same socioeconomic category, it may be good for you to engage with your small business office so that we know you're both interested in that and capable, so we can maybe watch that and help promote a socioeconomic set aside. So anyway, but with that, I do appreciate, yes, sir.
There's one more.
Yeah, okay, let's go with it.
Is there any advantage being ED WSB versus WSB if you don't perform the work? NAICS codes are specifically something that just says.
Okay, there's so many NAICS, that are associated with the WSB. And so basically, have them, can we take that question offline? And because that's one of our initiatives is the WSB spend. So we've been working on it. So I'll get back with you. So with that, thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Deneen. Thank you, Jason. And any follow-up questions, just send it to our workflow email that's out there. Jim will provide our pamphlet out there. And so just follow up with questions and we'll get the answers for you. So with that, I'll say over and out. Thank you. I like what you have to say there. It's good sharing.
Yeah, it's only a $5 fee for that.
Okay, well, good, because we're the government, we can't afford, we can barely afford the $5.